I don't consider myself a paranoid person. I say that because what I'm about to describe could easily sound like someone who was looking for reasons to be afraid. I wasn't. I moved to that part of rural Idaho specifically because I wanted space and quiet. I had grown up in Phoenix and spent my 20s in Denver, and by the time I hit 32, I was exhausted by the particular kind of noise that cities produce. Not just sound, the density of other people's lives pressing against yours constantly. I found the rental through a property management company based out of Boise. It was a farmhouse on a road called Miller Road, which tells you everything you need to know about how rural it was. The kind of road that gets a person's last name because that family owned everything on it for long enough that the name just stuck. The farmhouse itself was the only occupied property on that stretch. There had been a neighboring farm, but it had been vacant for several years. The management company was upfront about the isolation. They mentioned it in the listing almost as a selling point, which for me it was. I signed a 6-month lease in early March. The house was older but solid. Hardwood floors, thick walls, a covered porch facing west that caught the evening light in a way that made every sunset look like something painted. There was a barn behind the house that I had no use for, but that came with the property. The management company said the previous tenant had used it for storage. They had cleared it out before I moved in. It sat about 40 feet behind the house, large and empty, and slightly listing to one side the way old barns do. The first month passed without anything worth noting. I worked remotely, kept regular hours, cooked my own food, took long walks on the road in the evenings. The nearest town was 11 miles away. I went in twice a week for groceries and errands. The isolation I had wanted turned out to be exactly as restorative as I had hoped. I had a basic security setup, not because I was worried about anything specific. I had used a system in my Denver apartment and just continued the habit. 2 cameras, one facing the front porch and driveway, one facing the back of the house toward the barn. They fed to an app on my phone and saved footage to a cloud account. I checked them occasionally, but not obsessively. Mostly I forgot they were there. In the second month, I noticed the motion alerts increasing. The system was set to send a notification when the cameras detected movement. In the first month, I got occasional alerts from wind-moving tree branches or a passing vehicle on the road. Normal, false triggers. In the second month, the alerts started coming more frequently and specifically from the rear camera, the one facing the barn. I checked the footage each time. Most of it was nothing. Wind. A fox that turned out to visit the property regularly around dusk. Once a deer that stood at the edge of the property for several minutes before wandering off. But 3 times in that second month, the rear camera triggered at night, and when I checked the footage, there was nothing visible in the frame. Nothing visible is different from nothing there. The camera had a motion detection zone. When something triggered it, the footage showed whatever was in that zone. 3 times the alert fired and the footage showed an empty frame. The barn. The ground between the barn and the house. The edge of the property where the fence line ran. All of it still and empty and gray in the night vision. I called the management company and asked if the camera system could be malfunctioning. They sent someone out to check it. He tested it thoroughly and said it was functioning correctly. He said sometimes the sensors could be triggered by changes in temperature or humidity, especially at night when the temperature dropped significantly. He said it was probably that. I accepted that explanation. In the third month, I found the mark on the barn door. I walked back to the barn occasionally just to keep an eye on the property. One morning, I noticed something on the exterior of the barn door. Low down, near the base, a section of the old wood had been scored. Not weathering damage, not rot. Something sharp had been drawn repeatedly across the wood in the same spot. The marks were deliberate, several parallel lines about 4 inches long. I photographed it and sent the photo to the management company asking if they knew what it was. They said it looked like an animal, possibly a coyote or raccoon scratching at the door. The marks were at a height consistent with that. I accepted that explanation too. What I didn't mention to them was that the barn door was padlocked from the outside. If an animal had been scratching at it trying to get in, those marks would have been on the face of the door. These marks were on the interior edge of the door frame. The narrow strip of wood visible only when the door was partially open. Something had been inside the barn and had scratched at the door from within. The padlock had not been touched. I checked it carefully. No damage, no sign of tampering. There was no other entrance to the barn that I could find. 2 windows, both latched from the inside, both intact. Whatever had made those marks, I could not explain how it had gotten in or out. I started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand with the volume on instead of silenced. The alert that woke me came on a Wednesday night in the 4th month. 2:40 in the morning. Rear camera. I grabbed my phone and opened the app while still half asleep. The footage showed the area between the house and the barn. There was a figure walking toward the barn. Not running. Not moving quickly. Walking at a measured pace across the open ground between the house and the barn as if they had every right to be there. The night vision made everything greenish and flat, but I could see clearly. A person. Average height, dark clothing, no visible face because their back was to the camera. They reached the barn door and stood in front of it. The footage cut out. Not the app crashing, not a connectivity issue. The footage simply ended there, and the next saved clip didn't begin for another 40 minutes. 40 minutes of nothing recorded from that camera. I was sitting up in bed with my phone in both hands. I called 911. I told them I had security footage of an intruder on my property. They said they would send someone out. In a rural county at 2:40 in the morning, someone coming out meant 45 minutes minimum. I spent that time sitting on my bed with the bedroom door locked and every light in the house on. Deputies arrived. They walked the property with flashlights. They checked the barn. The padlock was intact. Nothing inside disturbed. No sign of anyone on the property. They were thorough and professional and genuinely seemed to take it seriously when I showed them the footage on my phone. One of them watched it twice without saying anything. Then he asked me if anyone else had access to the property. I said only the management company. He said they would follow up with them. I don't know what follow-up happened. I know nobody called me with an explanation. What I know is that for 40 minutes after that figure reached the barn door, the rear camera recorded nothing. And then it started recording again as if nothing had happened. The camera that the technician had confirmed was functioning correctly. The camera that had no technical reason to stop working. I broke my lease in month 5. The management company kept my deposit, and I didn't fight it. The math was simple. Whatever I lost on the deposit was worth less than staying another month on Miller Road. I live in a city again now. A mid-sized one, nothing like Denver. My apartment has neighbors on 3 sides, and I can hear them through the walls sometimes, which used to bother me. It doesn't bother me anymore. My brother went missing for 6 hours on a highway in rural Nebraska and came back with a story I still don't fully know what to do with. I'll tell it the way he told it to me, because I wasn't there. Everything after the first paragraph is his account. He had been driving back from visiting a friend in a town about 90 miles from where we grew up. It was late May. The drive home was almost entirely 2-lane highway through flat farmland. He had done it dozens of times. He knew the road. He called me at 11:45 at night. I was asleep and missed the call. He left a voicemail saying his car had gone off the road into a ditch and he was stuck and couldn't get the car out, but he was fine and was going to start walking toward the nearest town to find help. He said the town was about 4 miles ahead based on his GPS. He said not to worry. I didn't hear the voicemail until morning. By then he had been found, which is why I'm telling this story rather than a different kind of story. A farmer found him walking along a county road at 5:30 in the morning, miles from where his car had gone into the ditch, in a direction that didn't correspond to any town. The farmer drove him to the nearest gas station and he called our parents from there. His phone was dead by the time he was found. He had used the battery calling for help during the night. When I talked to him that afternoon, he was physically fine. Tired, dehydrated, a little shaken. His car was recovered from the ditch without significant damage. On the surface, it seemed like a rough night that had resolved itself, but when I asked him to walk me through those 6 hours, the story started developing edges that I couldn't smooth down no matter how I tried. He said he had started walking toward town after leaving the car. The road was flat and straight, and he could see a long distance ahead. His GPS said 4 miles to the nearest town. He walked for what felt like an hour. The town didn't get closer. He said this carefully when he described it. He said he understood that distance is hard to judge in the dark on flat terrain. He wasn't claiming anything impossible. He was just saying that he walked for a long time and the distance on his GPS didn't seem to change the way it should have. At some point, he became aware that there was someone walking on the road behind him. He hadn't heard a car stop. There had been no vehicle on the road for some time. He just became aware, the way you sometimes do, that the quality of the darkness behind him had changed. He looked back and could see a figure on the road maybe 200 feet behind him. He called out, asking if they needed help. No response. He kept walking. The figure kept walking. He sped up. The distance between them stayed the same. He tried calling 911, but his signal was too weak to connect. He tried calling me. I didn't answer. He tried calling our parents. No answer. He walked faster. He said at some point he was almost running. The figure behind him maintained the same distance regardless of his pace. 200 feet. Constant. He turned off the road and walked into a field. He said he didn't make a decision to do it. His body just turned off the road and he followed. He walked into the field and crouched down in the tall grass and waited. He stayed there for what he estimated was 2 hours. He said he could hear the road from the field. He listened for footsteps passing. He heard nothing. When he finally stood up and looked toward the road, there was nobody visible in either direction. He walked back to the road and started walking again. This time in a different direction than he had been going. He didn't consciously know why. He just felt the direction he had been heading was wrong. That's how he ended up miles from his car in a direction that didn't correspond to the town. He had changed direction in the middle of the night based on a feeling he couldn't explain. When I asked him what he thought the figure was, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he thought it was a person. He said there was nothing supernatural about his experience. A person had been walking behind him on a dark road in the middle of the night. Maybe someone who had also broken down. Maybe someone who lived in the area. Maybe someone whose intentions he had been right to not test. He said the thing that bothered him most was the distance. 200 feet, consistent. For however long he had been walking before he turned off into the field. That's not how people walk. Not strangers on a dark road who happen to be going the same direction. People either close distance naturally or fall behind. They don't maintain exactly the same interval in the dark. He's never driven that route again. He goes around now. An extra 40 minutes each way. I asked him once if he would have done anything differently that night. He thought about it and said no. He said the field had been the right call. He said sometimes the right call is to get off the road and get low and wait for whatever is out there to pass by. I think about that sometimes when I'm driving at night. The flatness of certain roads, the distance behind you that you can't see, the quality of darkness that changes when something enters it. I don't have an explanation for what my brother experienced. He doesn't either. He just knows that something walked behind him for a very long time at exactly the same distance, and that whatever it was, he was right not to let it close the gap. I worked the night shift at a mid-range hotel in downtown Memphis for almost 2 years. I took the job because it paid a night differential, and I was finishing a degree during the day. The work was mostly quiet. Check-ins tapered off after midnight, and from 2 onward, it was usually just me at the desk, the hum of the lobby lights and whatever was playing on the small television. I kept on low behind the counter. Hotels at night have their own atmosphere that's hard to describe to people who haven't worked in one. They're full of people, but those people are invisible. Behind every door is a life you know nothing about. You see them for 90 seconds at check-in, and then they become a room number. You stop thinking of them as people and start thinking of them as variables. 214 needs extra towels. 309 called about the noise from 310. That kind of thinking. The woman in 4B checked in on a Tuesday. I wasn't on shift when she arrived, so I didn't check her in. I came on at 11 and the day manager briefed me the way she usually did. She mentioned 4B, almost as an afterthought. She said the guest had checked in that afternoon, had asked several questions about the hotel layout, specifically about the stairwells and whether the roof was accessible, and had seemed, in the day manager's words, a little scattered. That description wasn't unusual enough to flag. Guests were often scattered. Travel is stressful. The first thing I noticed personally happened around 1 a.m. The elevator in our hotel had a habit. When someone rode it, the floor indicator above the lobby doors would show which floor it stopped at. Routine. That night I noticed the elevator indicator moving without any guest having passed through the lobby. The elevator went to 4, then 2, then back to 4, then 1, then 4 again. Over about 20 minutes, I watched it for a while. The lobby was empty. Nobody had passed my desk. I called up to the 4th floor on the house phone. Nobody answered. I called the 2nd floor. Nobody answered. This wasn't alarming on its own. Guests use stairwells. Guests move between floors for various reasons, and the elevator movement could have been a mechanical issue. I logged it and moved on. Around 2:30, I heard the stairwell door open. The door from the stairwell to the lobby was around a corner from my desk, not directly visible. I heard it open and then heard footsteps crossing the lobby. I looked up, expecting to see a guest. Nobody crossed into my line of sight. The footsteps had stopped. I came around the desk and looked toward the stairwell door. The lobby was empty. The stairwell door was closed. I stood there for a moment in the way you do when you're trying to reconcile what you heard with what you're seeing. I went back to the desk. At 3:15, the phone at my desk rang. Internal call, meaning it came from within the hotel. The display showed the room number. It was 4B, I answered. Standard greeting, Sal. There was no voice. There was sound, though. Not silence. I could hear something on the line. Breathing, or something close to it. And beneath that, very faint, what sounded like someone speaking in a low voice. Not to me. Not into the phone. Speaking the way someone does when they're talking to themselves or to someone else in the room. I said hello twice more. The call disconnected. I noted the time and the room number in the log and almost called back, but something made me hesitate. I'm not sure what. A feeling. The kind of minor instinct you get sometimes that you can't justify. At 4 a.m., the elevator indicator showed movement again. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, lobby. The doors opened. The lobby was empty. Nobody came out of the elevator. I walked over and looked inside. Empty. I held the doors open and looked at the ceiling, looked at the corners, the way you do when something doesn't make sense and you're hoping the room itself will offer an explanation. Nothing. I went back to the desk and called the manager on call. I described what I'd observed over the past 3 hours. She listened and said she would come in early. She asked me to do a welfare check on 4B. I went up to the 4th floor and knocked on the door of 4B. No answer. I knocked again and identified myself as front desk staff. No answer. Using the master key, I opened the door. The room was empty. Bed made, or rather not slept in. Luggage on the rack, clothes partially unpacked. The window was open, which guests weren't supposed to do. The bathroom light was on. I checked the bathroom. Empty. The guest in 4B was not in her room at 4:15 in the morning. I found her 40 minutes later. Not because I was looking in the right place. Because she walked through the lobby front door just as my manager was arriving. She was wet. Not soaked. But her hair was damp and her clothes had patches of moisture. It had not been raining. My manager handled it from there. I stepped back and let her take over. I could hear the conversation in fragments. The guest was calm. She said she had gone for a walk. She seemed entirely normal, composed. She checked out the following morning before I came on shift. I never found out who she was or what had happened that night. The manager didn't offer, and I knew better than to ask. Hotels accumulate situations they don't explain to night desk staff. It's part of the arrangement. What I think about, years later, is not the elevator or the phone call or even finding the room empty. Those things have explanations, probably. Elevators malfunction, people make odd calls, guests leave their rooms. What I think about is the footsteps. The footsteps I heard crossing the lobby at 2:30 in the morning. The footsteps that stopped before entering my line of sight. The lobby I walked into and found empty 30 seconds after hearing someone cross it. In 2 years of night shifts, I heard a lot of things in that hotel. Sounds travel strangely in large buildings at night. I made peace with most of them. I never made peace with those footsteps, because I know what I heard. And what I heard was someone who walked into that lobby and then was not there.